Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our office, NCRI-US in Washington. I would like to give you a brief summary of September 2022 uprising, and my colleague, Mr. Jafarzadeh, later will share with you some of the new information that we got from inside Iran. The uprising that erupted in September 2022 was a remarkable event in Iran's modern history. Triggered by the dreadful killing of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, the movement quickly expanded its focus beyond the government's oppressive treatment of women, evolving into a broad-based call for regime change that engulfed 282 cities, all of Iran's provinces. According to the main opposition, the People's Mujahedin Organization of Iran, PMOI, MEK, over 750 people lost their lives and more than 30,000 were arrested during the protests. Despite the government's efforts to control information by shutting down the internet, real-time updates allowed the world to witness the extent of the protests and the brutality of the regime's response. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, as well as many regime's officials, many times felt compelled to publicly acknowledge the role of the MEK PMOI affiliated resistance units in their speeches about the role they played in the resistance and the uprising, thereby confirming the regime's concern about the growing influence of organized opposition MEK among the younger generations. Women and Generation Z were at the forefront, infusing the movement with stamina and determination. It's crucial to understand that the women's political participation in 2022 uprising was not spontaneous. It was the result of 40 years of organized resistance against the regime, misogynist policies, a struggle in which women have played a leading role for more than 3 decades, from underground activism to leadership roles. In the PMOI MEK, the Iranian women have been preparing for this moment for so many long time. They were not just challenging the immediate atrocities, but also the deeply embedded main religious controlled system. Women became both the face and the driving force of a resistance aiming at social, political, and cultural transformation. Perhaps the most telling element of this uprising were its slogans. Protesters chanted, "Death to Khamenei, no monarchy, no supreme leader," capturing the essence of their broader frustration with authoritarian rule, irrespective of its ideological cloak. Their demand was a democratic republic, a multi-party system, a modern judiciary system, rooted in the principle of 10-point plan of Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, President-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI. Aggravating the turmoil were Iran's dismal economic conditions, a 50% surge in the cost of living, coupled with a plummeting currency and soaring food prices. Economic hardship thus acted as a catalyst rather than a separate issue. The regime found itself in an increasingly untenable position, not only politically, but also economically. In summary, the 2022 Iran uprising posed a direct challenge to the legitimacy of a 4-decade theocratic regime. Its scale, stretching across demographics and social strata was remarkable. Their slogans made it clear that the fight was against authoritarian rule itself, irrespective of its ideological cloak and basis. And the role of women revealed a resistance that was neither sporadic nor momentarily, but a calculated culmination of years of sacrifice and struggle. So, the uprising has already left a permanent mark on Iran's socio-political landscape, the ramifications of which will undoubtedly vibrate for years to come. With well over 750 lives lost and countless more imprisoned and tortured, the stakes couldn't be higher, but neither could the hope for a new Iran. It was again such a background and a determined nation with 40+ years of organized resistance that Tehran employed all of its repressive forces and allocated as much as money and resources to crush the movement to no avail. I now ask my colleague, Mr. Jafarzadeh, to share with you the new information that we got from inside Iran, the extensive effort that Iranian regime is trying to suppress the uprising, but to no avail until now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Samsami. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our office, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, U.S. Representative Office. My name is Ireza Jafarzadeh, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Washington office of the NCRI. As we just heard from Ms. Samsami about the overview of the uprising, what actually happened over the past 1 year, what's ahead of us, and how the uprising has left, as she said, a permanent mark. And in that context, what I want to do, I want to share with you very detailed information that we have obtained from our sources inside the country, but also other sources have come from inside Iran that shows the role of the Revolutionary Guards in suppressing the uprising, but also their effort to prevent the resurgence of the uprising just ahead of the anniversary of the September 2022 uprising. So let's get to the details of the information we have. But before that, I want to remind everyone, because this event is both in person, as some journalists are here, but also it's broadcast live on our social media platforms, on our website. Those journalists who are watching the event virtually, you can pose your questions by emailing them to media@ncri-us.org. I repeat, media@ncri-us.org. We'll get your questions and we'll present it when the Q&A session comes right after I'm done with my original presentation. So let's get to the source. As I mentioned earlier, the source is actually the network inside Iran of the Mujahedin-e Khalq, the also known as the MEK or the PMOI, and relying on the social network that they have inside the country. Now, let's look at the the strategy of the regime to prevent the resurgence of the uprising, because since day one, when the protests started, especially in the backdrop of all the previous protests that we have had before, their goal was to first suppress it, and second, prevent the resurgence of the uprising. And in that context, they have drastically increased the budget of various repressive agencies, offering financial rewards and privilege to prevent desertion of the security forces. And I will get into the detail of this. And of course, in order to do that, the decision, as always, comes from the top, the Supreme Leader Khamenei, which appointed the issue to the Supreme National Security Council, which is the highest decision-making body within the regime, presided by the head of the executive branch, that's the Ebrahim Raisi, the regime's president, and also implemented by the IRGC. And that's the part especially that we want to focus on today, because I don't think there has been a complete picture of what the role of the IRGC has been over the years, but especially since the September 2022 uprising. Here's the hierarchy of the Revolutionary Guards, their operations all over the country. But let's start from the top, the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei. This is the chart that was put together by our movement, compiling information from various sources, identifying the relationships, and figuring out how the whole structure actually operates. Now, the Supreme National Security Council, which I mentioned earlier, is presided over by the head of the executive branch, that's the Ebrahim Raisi. Then you have the heads of the other two branches, the judiciary branch, you have Ghulam Hossein Ejei, you have the legislative branch, Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, and the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council is Ali Shamkhani, one of the top brass Revolutionary Guard commanders since day one. And then you have the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, Mohammad Bagheri. His background is IRGC. The Foreign Minister, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, again, IRGC background. MOIS Chief Ismail Khatib Mullah. The Minister of Interior is Ahmad Vahidi. He was the very first commander of the Quds Force, which is tasked with what they call extraterritorial activities, meaning terrorism. He was the first commander of the Quds Force. He's now he's been a veteran member of the Revolutionary Guards. He's now the Minister of Interior as part of the Supreme National Security Council. And then you have the Commander-in-Chief of the IRGC, Hossein Salami, and then the Army Chief of Staff, Abdul Rahman Mousavi, and the Minister of Defense, Qarai Ashtiani. Now, under that is actually the IRGC's own Supreme Command Council. That's the council that oversees all of the activities of the operations of the IRGC. Task is basically suppression of the people and the uprisings. You have the head of all, the commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary Guards, of course, is Hossein Salami. Then his deputy, Ali Fadawi. And then you have the commanders of the other four forces of the IRGC. That's the Quds Force, the ground forces, the Navy, and the Aerospace Force, plus the commander of the Basij, which used to be a part of the IRGC, but is now operating under the command of the IRGC after they upgraded their facilities and the resources. And then the head of the IRGC intelligence, which is Mohammad Kazemi. So that constitutes the IRGC Supreme Command Council, which when it comes to the uprising, they have been in charge of overseeing how they actually want to suppress the protests all over the country, but also specifically preventing the resurgence of it. Now, one area that I want to focus on is that since a few years ago, after the 2017 uprisings, the structure of the Revolutionary Guards changed. And now they have the command of each province, 30 provinces plus the Tehran itself. That makes it 31 provinces in the country. And let's look at the Tehran situation, because that's where the bulk of the activities were shaping up. There is a base called Sarallah Base, which is the actually the command for the suppression of all the activities, when it comes to protests, to any kind of dissent in the city. Especially during the red alert situation, the commander of the Sarallah base becomes the IRGC commander, that's Hossein Salami. So he takes over as a commander of the Sarallah base, and everything comes under his command. But the important thing is actually what's under the Sarallah base. Let's take a closer look at that right here. That's the Sarallah base here. As I mentioned, the IRGC Major General Hossein Salami is commanding it. Then you have the representative of the MOIS, and the head of the commander of the Tehran State Security Forces. And then you have the commander of Sayyid al-Shuhada Corps, which is in charge of the Tehran province suppression. Then you have the commander of Muhammad Rasulullah Corps, or also known as Muhammad Corps, which is in charge of the suppression of the greater Tehran and only focus on Tehran. Then you have the judiciary, and then the representative of the Interior Ministry, which under regular circumstances, state security forces are under the command of the Interior Minister. But under red alert situation, all of them, including the Interior Minister, they all come under the command of the Sarallah base. Now, the Muhammad Corps, which, as I said, is in charge of the suppression of protests in Greater Tehran, they have divided the city in 4 different areas, just like Washington, D.C. And you have the northwest, you have the southwest, northeast, and southeast Tehran, and each of those 4 have their own base appointed to them. The FAT base is actually dealing with southwest of Tehran, the Quds base, northwest of Tehran, Nasr base, northeast Tehran, and Qad base in southeast Tehran. So when we are talking about the protest, the uprising, specifically since September of last year, the entire operation was run by the Sarallah base when it came to Tehran. And then equivalent to this, they have the same situation in each province. As I mentioned earlier, they have IRGC command in 30 provinces. So in each province, you have the commander of the Revolutionary Guards in that province taking over, controlling, even the governor, everybody else go under the command of that. Now, having said that, let's just take a look at the role of the IRGC specifically. Clearly, because of the fear of the overthrow, the IRGC was basically dominating the role. And when we looked at the whole situation, we realized that their role has been even much greater than we even thought in the beginning. And they have actually employed their own combat forces, in addition to controlling things, but dispatching their own forces on the ground to confront the protest. Now, and I'm going to take a look at some of the documents that we obtained from inside the Iranian regime, and we're revealing them here for the first time. Here is this document that is signed by the Brigadier General of the IRGC, Hassan Hassanzadeh. He is the commander of the Muhammad Corps, and it's marked top secret and very urgent, as you can see on the top. And they basically, the date of the document is November 2nd, 2022. This is the height of the uprising, and that's when the directive comes. Now, in this directive, basically, it says, it has, as you can see, it has 14 items. Here, giving lots of details, defining what the goal is, saying that the goal is to prevent unrest and operations such as writing graffiti on the walls, and to arrest the activists who write the graffiti. And then it talks about the operational divisions that need to be sent to the area. It defines like what time each of them would go, which areas they would be assigned, what kind of surveillance they would have. They even name each battalion or division and what they actually have to do. And then saying, specific dates, all of the details of the activities are defined, all of them with the intention of crushing any activities by the protesters at the uprising. Now, this is another one. the date, this one is actually for 2 days later. That's November 4, 2022. Again, it's top secret as it marks up there. And basically, it talks about, for instance, the division, operational division of the IRGC with the capacity of 4 battalions. And they detail what kind of motorized vehicles are going to be there, what kind of special forces are going to be there, what kind of actually weapons they should have with them. All of the details are assigned. They even have which organization is assigned to each cross-section of Tehran, which are crucial parts of the city. All of them with the details are assigned here. I won't get into details of it, but that document, actually, we have it in the package that you have. You can look at it later on. I just wanted to get a sense of what kind of role that Muhammad Corps was actually playing. This one is actually another one. Again, the goal is defined to prevent the unrest and potential counter security actions, meaning the activities of those who are in the forefront of the protest, the resistance units of the MEK, all those who are actually driving the protest or confronting the Revolutionary Guards. The IRGC command at Muhammad Corps are assigned to confront them. So as I said, every detail of that is mentioned, and street by street and all the details. Then this is another one. This is a week before that, dated October 28, 2022. Again, it's urgent with top secret priority assigned by the commander of the IRGC, Muhammad Corps, Hassanzadeh. And also it basically details what actually they should do in order to, they say they want to show the prowess. When you have these IRGC forces, whether they're on motorbike or they just come as a large unit, they say the goal is to show the prowess, create fear, and they go location by location. And so that task is designed there. They also specify, this one is actually assigned to the Nasr operational command by the Muhammad Rasulullah. Nasr was one of the 4 areas of Tehran that operates under the Muhammad Corps. They also mentioned that when they arrest the people on the spot, they need to turn them over immediately when they identify those who are in the forefront of chanting slogans, but also in the forefront of writing slogans, to turn them over to the intelligence organization of the IRGC. So you can see the IRGC is involved in the suppression, is involved in the arrest of them, is involved in receiving those who have been arrested, and then the IRGC intelligence is actually controlling it. There are 2 major intelligence organizations within the country, which is the Ministry of Intelligence and the IRGC intelligence organization. And of course, when it comes during the protests, it's the IRGC intelligence that basically takes over and dominates even over the Ministry of Intelligence. So now let's talk about the budget, because all of these activities that they're doing, especially in the height of the protests, needs money, needs resources, needs additional augmentation of whatever they need. And that's exactly what they were doing in the height of the protests, as the documentations show, that there have been demands for budget increase from all of the agencies that have been involved one way or the other in the suppression of the protests, whether it was the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, the state security forces, you had the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, the MIS, the Interior Ministry, the municipality of Tehran that controls the metro and all of the key positions in Tehran, even the seminaries and the mullahs whose job is to identify things and boost the morale of the regime's forces, all of them have asked for additional money and resources, and they've gotten it. And that's one item that I want to get into details of it. Just to give you an idea, we have Mohammad Hossein Bagheri, who is the chief of staff of the armed forces of the regime, who has asked for money. I'll get into the detail of it. We had the RGC Brigadier Ahmad Bahidi as the interior minister, and then the Ismail Khatib, the MOIS chief or the intelligence minister. The seminaries, you have Hossein Salami as the commander of the Sarallah headquarters, asking for resources, and then Hossein Nejad, which is his deputy. He basically runs the operation at Sarallah garrison during regular situation, but under the red alert, he operates under or on behalf of Hossein Salami, and then the deputy minister of intelligence and some other holdings. I'll get into it. So that will give you a picture that it wasn't just one area or one agency, rather the entire suppressive agencies have been boosted with additional money and resources. This is Mohammad Bagheri, a letter to Ibrahim Raisi. As you can see here, this letter basically was dated November 24, 2022, again at the height of the uprising. And it's a highly confidential letter written to Ibrahim Raisi. And he says basically the IRGC and the state security forces, they need immediate budget increase for cars, motorcycles, radio equipment, uniforms, individual equipment, and unavailable operational costs, basically trying to boost the operation of these suppressive forces. Now, how much money has he asked for? $350 million. In one instance, Mohammad Bagheri asking for $350 million in the height of the uprising, and he got it. This is another example. Said Ismail Khatib, as the head of the intelligence, his letter to Ibrahim Raisi, again asking for money and resources. The date is December 28, 2022, and again it's a highly confidential letter to Raisi. He says he needs money for missions, operational measures, technical equipment, overtime, fuel, food, items and equipment used in dealing with riots, meaning suppression, equipment that they want to kill people, to arrest them and all of that. How much money has he asked for? A total of $41 million. There were two items, 34 and 7, a total of $41 million asked by the intelligence minister. Here's another case. Hossein Nejad letter to Ibrahim Raisi asking for money and resources. Now, what does he want them for? First of all, the date is February 14, 2023, earlier this year. He says he wants to prevent any anti-security incidents, meaning the activities by the youth or those who are confronting revolutionary guards, the resistance units, updating and renewing the closed-circuit camera system, and then talks about face recognition cameras. So they want to install more face recognition cameras in various parts of the city. How much he's asking for? $8 million. With $8 million, you can get a lot of cameras installed in the key locations, which would have the capability of face recognition, not just the regular cameras. And now this is Hossein Salami himself asking for increased budget. The letter is just a short while ago, May 7, 2023. Again, highly confidential document asking for cultural activities for Sarallah garrison. When they have they're done with asking for budget for everything else, they add to it for cultural activities, meaning incentives, boosting their morale and all of that. How much is asking for? $78 million just earlier this year in May. And then Ahmad Vahidi, the Interior Minister, the IRGC veteran, dated January 8, 2023, a highly confidential letter again seeking money for state security forces as soon as possible due to significance of the issue, meaning that they need the money urgently for that. How much they're asking for? $32 million for the Interior Minister. Now, in addition to all of that, the mullahs, the seminaries, are also granted additional funding. Here's the increase in the budget for the mullahs affiliated with the regime, $168 million. This was also very recently sent. Now, not only that, but those units of the state security forces or the IRGC that are involved in the suppression, they get rewarded when they do the killings, when they put down the revolt here and there. This is one example. The Qadir holding company actually helping suppression of the regime protests. Of course, the funds come from the armed forces. The fund is actually controlled by them, and then rewarding them, basically showing that rewarding them for with $14,000 to the Armed Forces Social Security Organization for suppressing the October 18, 2022 protests in Asaliya economic region. And that's a lot of money because $14,000 may not sound as big a number here, but remember the average salary in Iran is $7 a day. So it's like 20,000 days of salary for a worker. I'm sorry, 2,000 times higher. So let me get back to where I started, the Revolutionary Guards and how they actually control and dominate the suppression of the protests in the country. How different agencies involved in the suppression are all operating under the command of the Sar Allah base. So we talk about the Revolutionary Guards, we are talking about a killing machine. Revolutionary Guards were built since day one to kill people, to suppress dissent, and control the population. And they have not only done that, but also controlled the resources of the country in terms of the economy and everything else. But don't forget, most important than anything else, their main task is to kill people. And that's exactly how you could see during the protests. Now, one of the other documents that was obtained by a group called Qiyam ta Sarneguni, meaning uprising till overthrow inside the country, from internal documents inside the country shows that there was actually extensive effort by the regime throughout this period over the past 1 year trying to confront the opposition, the main organized opposition, the Mujahedin-e Khalq, by putting together an effort, the gathering of various institutions from the Ministry of Intelligence to the Foreign Ministry, the Judiciary, and others to figure out how they should draft a strategy to confront, specifically to confront the MEK. The main focus, the main target in all of these things is always the MEK. Just the same way as in summer of 1988, the main focus of the massacre was on the MEK based on a fatwa issued by then Supreme Leader Khomeini. The main focus of repression is to neutralize and to counter the MEK's resistance units. But interestingly, this internal document is very telling. The kind of issues that they deal with regarding the MEK. They say, this is their own analysis, that they say unlike the monarchists, The MEK, of course, they don't say MEK. I just put it in the parenthesis, the hyphen, because they actually refer to what the word munafiqin means, the hypocrites. That's the term, the derogatory term they use for the MEK. They say, unlike the monarchists, the MEK have unity and coherent organizations. It also says that also the MEK have announced that they seek regime change by forming resistance units. This is actually the, and then in terms of the, they also say that the MEK are the only organization that has a plan to be the alternative. They say the MEK are both seeking to overthrow the system and are the alternative. These are all the words of the regime's, various agencies that they have held joint sessions, joint meetings. They had 6, at least we have the report of 6 of those sessions, that this is the result of that. And then they say the MEK possess a network of influence and espionage within the country. It also says the MEK possess a range of capabilities, including the ability to collect information. They have central leadership. They have economic power, and they have a social power. These are all views, assessment of the regime about the MEK. And it concludes that this group can carry out armed operations. They have a strong motivation to fight. They have a history of fighting and resisting against the system. They possess significant information capabilities. And it says overall, this group is highly dangerous as a group aiming to overthrow the system. So they know where they're focusing on and where the threat is coming. Now, let me just wrap up what we discussed today. Basically, to prevent the recurrence of the uprising, the regime has significantly increased the budget and spending of various repressive institutions. And as we discussed earlier, because the September 2022 uprising basically spread to over 280 cities in all 31 provinces, and people have been chanting death to Khamenei, death to the dictator, death to the oppressor, be it the Shah or the leader, and they have been basically calling for the overthrow of the Iranian regime. A year later, where do we stand? Actually, in reality, the conflict between the people and the regime has significantly escalated. The divide is a lot deeper. The social situation is increasingly volatile, and the organized resistance, which is the key factor in bringing about change in any country, specifically in the case of Iran, has actually escalated. And despite the full-scale suppression that we just discussed and showed the documents, think about it, how in the world that this uprising continued for months and continues to threaten the regime as we speak now, despite all of the measures, despite allocating the entirety of the Revolutionary Guards, the Ministry of Intelligence, and all the suppressive agencies, despite allocating all of the money and resources to them. You know, if you just simply add up those numbers that I showed you, just those that we have the documentations, I just did a quick add up, that's over $700 million, almost $750 million, based on just those 5 or 6 documentations. That's the amount of money that has gone to suppress the dissent. Nevertheless, the resistance has been on the rise. Just a few months ago, the MEK announced that 3,626 members of the resistance units have been either arrested, killed, or involuntarily missing. But they said, in reality, their resistance units have expanded both in terms of numbers, but also in terms of capabilities. No wonder that the regime had to create a special committee within the different interagencies to deal with them. So what does all of this mean? Well, this means that every dollar that is given to the Iranian regime under any pretext, under any circumstances, is actually used and badly needed by the regime and used for suppressing the Iranian people, for funding terrorism, and for also developing their nuclear weapons. So appeasement, in one word, is counterproductive, it's immoral, and it's to the detriment of the people of Iran who have already rejected this regime and are constantly involved in the protests, and they want a free Iran, a democratic Iran, a republic form of government, rejecting any form of dictatorship. So what needs to be done? Well, the Western nations need to send the dossier of the human rights violations of the Iran regime to the UN Security Council. We're in a few days where the UN General Assembly will meet, and this is a timely situation that this issue is brought up there. Instead of giving money to the Ayatollahs, you need to hold them accountable for their crimes, including the 1988 massacre of 30,000 political prisoners in Iran. We also need to see a snapback of sanctions on the Iranian regime to counter their nuclear defiance and their missile and drone activities. The Ayatollahs need to be expelled from all international bodies and shut down the regime's embassies or intersections, expelling their diplomats and their agents, and recognize the right of the people of Iran for resisting the Iranian regime, for their right to self-defense, as stipulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and everywhere else. So the priority should be given to the people of Iran, not the Ayatollahs. Instead of focusing on dialogue and rapprochement and giving concessions to the Ayatollahs, which would only make things worse, the focus should be how to side with the people of Iran, who have been very, very clear. That wraps up this part of our presentation. I want to remind everyone that just today we released this report, and you have a copy of it here. It's Iran's Uprising and the Regime's Dilemma, a nation aflame for revolution, that tells the story of the uprising, and some of the information that we discuss here is actually presented here. So I'm going to go now to the question and answer session. Please, everyone, when you speak, please speak to the microphone. It's available here. Introduce yourself so that the audience also virtually can hear you. Please, and then we'll go to John. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Farhad with the Voice of America, Persian Service. What is the NCRI's stance to the Biden administration agreeing to unfreeze $6 billion of the Iranian money held in South Korea, given the fact that your presentation was basically saying that with the money that the regime has, it ends up not in the hand of the people, but on the suppression of the people. So I just wanted to get your stance on this transaction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. First of all of these transactions that is leading to the unfreezing or allowing, providing $6 billion to the Iran regime is done under the pretext of releasing hostages. Let me be very clear that those hostages should have never been held to begin with. They should have been released long ago. And the only way to get them released is by being firm and decisive. Hold the regime accountable for their crimes against humanity. Hold them accountable for their terrorism instead of rewarding it. So this whole policy of rewarding to get hostages back only begets more terrorism, begets more hostage taking. Look at the history in the past 30, 40 years. It's not a new thing. It dates back to the 80s when the Iran regime were taking hostages in Lebanon and continued dealing with various Western countries. And guess what? The regime got the money and the resources, got all the concessions that they wanted. The people of Iran paid the price, of course, for it. That's how we got designated in 1997 and afterwards. But the terrorism continued. The hostage-taking became a very profitable business. So you don't want to make that a profitable business for the Ayatollahs. And of course, under any pretext, even a single dollar must not go to the Iranian regime, because it will end up in the coffers of the Revolutionary Guards. It's going to be used, as we showed the evidence today, it's going to be used for suppressing the Iranian people, for funding terror, and destabilizing the whole region. Yes. Do you have any follow-up questions? Yes, John, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the stimulating presentation. At one of the previous forums that you had, Senator Lieberman and Ambassador Bolton, I believe, focused on the uprising by women and pointed out that every one of the guards who were out there have wives, mothers, sisters, daughters, who are probably going to voice their animosity toward this. And this would lead, hopefully, to desertions from the army, or at the very least a refusal to punish the demonstrators. This would obviously be a key, a pivotal element in the overthrow of the regime. Have you seen any signs of the desertion that is so important?
Well, desertion within the military structure of the regime happens as a result of they're being highly dissatisfied, but also feeling that they are under pressure. Desertion will never happen when you have rewards going to the Revolutionary Guards, people talking about dealing with the Revolutionary Guards, even considering any kind of future for the Revolutionary Guards, or continued concessions to them. Obviously, as was the case in the time of the Shah, and we have had examples in other countries, in order to facilitate the desertion, you need to show that the regime is in its back foot, that they are being isolated by the outside world, but also confronted by the people inside the country. So I think the best way to make those things happen is to do exactly the opposite of what the regime is trying to do. You saw in some of these documentations that a lot of money was allocated to the families and the individuals within the repressive forces in order to prevent desertion. So what you want to do, you want to go the opposite direction. You want to build pressure, you want to drain their resources and their money, you want to designate them, you want to make them pay the price. Desertion will only happen when those who are involved in repression are paying the price for it. And then the others will say it's time for us to jump the ship. Not just securing their future, not just giving concessions to them and all of that. And of course, and that's why we have been focusing on not just starting by desertion, but actually you start by building pressure on the regime. You start by confronting the Revolutionary Guards. You start by empowering the resistance units of the Revolutionary of the people to confront the Revolutionary Guards. That's how this is going to happen. And of course, this will happen in large numbers when we get to the later stages of the overthrow.
Got it.
Good. Any other questions?
Well, we have questions of folks and journalists who are watching the event, the press conference online. There's a three-part question from John Bowden from The Independent. What is the underground mood in the Iran's universities and colleges as the anniversary of Mahsa Amini's murder approaches? The second part, how are the Iran's youth feeling about the successes and setbacks of their protests? And the last one, what kind of ramifications do you think the Amini demonstrations will have for the future of youth protests in the country?
Let's start with the first part of the question. I hope I remember all the three parts it is.